Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor.
Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send a message to others that they are not alone.
Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, and find some research information about PTSD. And if you can, look good while supporting Cracked Armor by buying some gear.
(10-9). Did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I say, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
This is episode 38 of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton, and I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress, along with a couple of other things, but we're not getting into that at this time. Last week was the first week that I had not released a new episode of the podcast since its very inception back in January. I actually tried to release an episode. I was changing the format up a bit just for one episode in the sense that it was just going to be me. It was an hour of listening to me. Now, what happened is, well, the audio quality turned out shitacular. I'm not sure if it was, some spirituality, an angel on my shoulder, fate, karma, I don't know, but it didn't come out in a manner that I felt would be of any quality to share. And that is a good thing. Because ultimately, it was an episode, it did end with positivity, but it was an episode where I really shared a lot of shit that I've been through over the last couple of weeks. And it's been a shitty couple of weeks. I'm not going to pull punches. It has been a shitty couple of weeks. I'm dealing with my own things. A big takeaway that I was trying to record last week was that PTSD is chronic. It seems to have its inflammation times and its calm periods. It seems to have its ups and its downs. But regardless of how you want to talk about it, how you want to call it, how you want to describe it, how you want to say that you have it, but you take it, you control it, it doesn't control you, whatever. All good. The reality is that it is there. It is not going anywhere. It is a lifer. It is like herpes. And I say like herpes because, well, I'm just trying to be somewhat comedic. However, it's not going anywhere. It's with you. It's staying. It's just a matter of you trying to mitigate the symptomology of it, trying to recognize when you are starting to get fired up, have an idea of what it is that causes you to activate or to trigger and to try to, avoid as best you can those situations, or at least know when you're getting fired up and have the opportunity to remove yourself, I guess, to deal with it, to, as I said a second ago, to mitigate it. So the episode didn't get recorded. You didn't get to hear my shitty couple of weeks, and that is okay, because I promised you all that this podcast would be much more about positivity, about post-traumatic growth, and not about listening to the shitfest. I just want to say again, I totally understand that you are struggling. Please know that I am. And so when I do talk about trying to be positive, trying to focus on the growth, I don't want you to think that is because I have managed to find the magic key, figure out whatever. No. I do know the light is inside of me, but so is the darkness. There seems to be a constant battle between light and darkness. And I don't know why, but darkness seems to win more frequently than light. Regardless, I am well aware that the light is there. It is always going to be there. I am not going to let darkness take me over. Darkness will fucking trip me up at times, but light is going to help me get back up on my feet, realize the good things I have around me, realize the blessings I have in life, appreciate them, and be prepared once more to do that fucking dance with darkness. On this episode, I have Evan Birch. He is going to talk a little bit about his PTSD. He's gone through 20 years of it. He's only 38 years old, and he's already experienced 20 years in emergency services in Alberta and has a shit ton of scars. He has been through the shit. But rather than focus on that, Evan and I are going to talk about more positivity. What has helped him work through some of his darkness? What has got him now to a point that he's communicating better with his fiance, with his children, and what is getting him out of his head, out of his house, and out of his own way. Stick around. You're in for a solid episode. Let's take a quick break.
This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it, to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone.
Also, check out Willow Tree Farm, care of Jason Subkowicz, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who frequently updates his Instagram to share his story. You can follow him at jason.subkowicz. That's Jason.Sierra Oscar Bravo Kilo Oscar Whiskey India Charlie Zulu.
And we are back from the break. Thank you very much for sticking around for the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. On today's episode, I am happy to introduce Evan Birch. Now, I'm going to share a couple of things about Evan before we get going. First of all, Evan has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. However, rather than spending the episode airing grievances, getting into a bunch of bad memories, we're going to focus on tools. We're going to talk about Evan's symptom mitigation and his work towards post-traumatic growth, with the concept and the ideology being to share his successes, what has worked for him, and in an attempt to be able to help you get through yours. Evan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, brother. And listen, we're not gonna hesitate. I'm just gonna go right in there and go. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So I have worked in emergency services for the better part of 2 decades. I started when I was ripe old age of 18. I'm 38 now, so it's kind of surprising 2-decade career being at my age in emergency services, but here I am. So I worked as an air ambulance, fire and EMS dispatcher for most of that time, on and off throughout my career at various organizations. I helped thousands of people, saved countless lives, and, helped people really on their worst day. And in turn, it broke me. It got me to the point of, just not really knowing who I was. It was pretty heavy for a very long period of time until I finally decided to actually ask for the help that I needed, which was actually harder than probably I ever realized that it was until I did it, which was kind of surprising. And then also outside of my career, I'm an ultra runner, so I've been running for the better part of 2 decades. Got into the longer distances about 6 or 7 years ago. So when I say ultra distances, I say anything more than 42 kilometers. So I just recently finished a 200 miler. So that's as far as I've gone. So it's interesting. You use these things as tools to find somewhere to put all of the pain and all of the despair and all of those bad feelings. So that's what I've used running for a long time. I live in Calgary, Alberta, here with my fiance, and I have 2 young daughters as well, 6 and 8. So I got 2 little ones on the go all the time. So
Awesome.
So that's me.
Man, we have something in common. I recently drove 200 miles, So that's it.
Yeah.
I felt I didn't feel that tired after it. I mean, I felt I needed to stretch a little bit. I don't know how you felt after yours, but I mean, I was okay. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it's a casual day trip to Edmonton from
Right?
Calgary. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, man. Holy smokes, brother. Run. I can see right now in your eyes and on your face that you have a sense of, well, I'm going to say happiness, that you have a sense of satisfaction, that you have managed to find that part of you that was once lost. Not that I'm saying that you're necessarily the same person as you were before, but you've managed to find the good again. Can you share that with the listeners, but also, Evan, let's talk about what it is that got you through those dark and dreary times that you had spoken about.
Yeah, I think, there's a saying that I came across that was, if you can summon joy in the pursuit, all that shame, guilt, despair, everything just fades into the background. And I mean, how do you find that joy? I mean, I think the most important thing for me is to find that truth within myself, and, what's the best way to say this? To, not worry and make other people feel comfortable for how I am.
I like that.
It's really just kind of diving into myself, and, obviously what I experienced, I tied myself very closely to my job. My job was my identity. When people ask me, what do you do? I instantly said, I'm an air ambulance dispatcher for so-and-so, or I'm a 911 call taker, I'm a 911 dispatcher. I never said, I'm Evan and, I'm a kind, genuine, nice person. It was always defined by what I did, not who I was.
Yes, sir.
And that's as soon as something like that leaves you and, you go off of work and you take the time that you need to get better, your whole semblance of self is gone. Your identity is gone, because you've tied yourself too closely to it. So it's, I now obviously where I'm at, I don't tie myself to what I do. It's not who I am. It's, just like my running isn't who I am. It's something I do. It's not that I'll never define myself by what I do ever again, simply because it basically, when it's gone, it's gone. And you don't really know who you are anymore.
So you lose that sense of identity, which I agree. I completely empathize with that. I understand 100% how that affects you and trying to figure out who exactly you are once again. What is it that all of a sudden helps you find a sense of identity again? Who is Evan? What did Evan become once he was no longer working in emergency services?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I think there's a lot of people that think, when something like this happens to them that they, and I don't want to say, it's not really like PTSD is, as like Gabor Mate says, you probably read a few of his books, it's not what happened to you, it's what happened inside of you and like how your body reacted to those things. So it's not, it was me trying to figure out where to place it and to process things. Because I mean, as you've mentioned a few times before, it wasn't just work. It wasn't just, that isn't the one, the catalyst to everything. As soon as you start actually going through therapy, and, I went through what's called accelerated resolution therapy, which is, for those that don't know, it's basically you're following a hand similar to EMDR. But I call it like EMDR on steroids, because you are in it. Like, you are feeling every possible thing that you can imagine feeling coming at you lightning speed, and your body is trying to process it by following a hand and your eye movements going back and forth. And the idea is to kind of recreate these neural pathways and help you remember things differently and create different stories to be able to heal from it and feel what you actually need to feel. So I think the biggest thing for me and how I kind of got through it is, it took me realizing that, in order to move through this, like, I have to be vulnerable. I have to completely surrender to the process. And it took me months to even get to that point, even, the first 3-4 months of therapy to even get to that point of surrendering.
Well, the last thing we want to do is be vulnerable, right? Because, essentially you've gone through a career, 2 decades, like you've said, of, people at their most vulnerable times we don't see people on their best days. Yeah. We see them on their absolute worst days, where they are typically victims, whether it's, not necessarily a victim of a crime, but a victim in a motor vehicle collision, a victim in, accidental discharge of a firearm, out hunting, so on and so forth. But what we see is complete and utter sadness, despair, and vulnerability. And I think we tie those together, that we somehow think they're one. It's you can't just feel vulnerable without feeling the other 2 or the other 3 or the other 4. And so this sense of vulnerability when it comes to working through our sessions with a therapist, I agree with you. It takes months because we don't want to get there. We don't want to let that go. Is that fair to say in your case?
Yeah, for me, the first few months of therapy were, the first thing that they say when you're going through the accelerated resolution therapy is the only way to do this wrong is if you're trying to do it right. So you're sitting there, and for me, like the phrase that we sometimes use in the running world is the first step of being good at something is sucking at something. And like, I sucked at therapy. Like, I'll be honest. Like, I absolutely sucked at therapy. I was the best way to explain it is I was trying to win at therapy. Like, my competitive nature took over, and I was trying to win therapy. Like, all my years of running and everything. Like, how do
you win therapy? Yeah, that's awesome.
Like,
I like the concept though, but it's like true. Yeah.
Right. Like, and until I fully surrendered, and it came to a head when I ended up having to go for basically a psych assessment from an independent person to validate my claim because of some questions that came in. And my current psychologist basically said, like, if you don't bare your soul in that session and stop holding back what you're holding back from me, you're not going to get the help that you need. Yeah. So, for That's me, true. that was probably the absolute hardest day out of my entire situation, was going to that assessment. You're sitting there with 1,000 multiple choice questions, somebody who doesn't know your story at all, and you're essentially trying to validate why you're not okay. I don't think there's, it kind of comes back to, I won't get into too much of the nitty gritty about kind of my situation, but it's until we stop siloing mental health away from the physical, when it comes to these claims, it's just going to keep perpetuating the problem. When's the last time that somebody had to go in to validate that they had a broken arm, then they had to go off work? It's unfortunate. I get it. There's people that, play the system and play the game. And those of us that need the help and want the help and commit to the process to heal for not just ourselves, but our families, our friends. It's sad. That's the biggest thing.
Absolutely, man. And you know what? The reality of it is that it is a physiological injury as well. You mentioned earlier in terms of your neural pathways, changes occur in your brain that result from essentially your brain taking the information and trying to make predictions about what will happen next. That's what we do. Our brain essentially consistently makes predictions. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what we're going to face. But when you throw on the TV, you have a prediction of what's going to happen. The screen is going to come up. And that's because of repetitive, experiences of repetitively doing it. And so this becomes the reality in terms of trauma exposure, is that although it can be a singular event, the reality with people like us, Evan, is that it tends to more be multiple events. And so the brain starts to reprocess and train us to expect certain things so that we are not as discharged when it occurs. However, that also shuts down parts of us, and this is what creates numbing. It creates, an antisocial dilemma in the sense that we just don't want to be around people. We feel better when we're isolated. It creates a bunch of changes in us. And I guess what I'm trying to say is you, sir, are 100% right that there is biology to this. And we may not yet be at a point where you can go in and get an x-ray and go, boom, broken arm, and you, sir, have PTSD. But I don't think we're necessarily that far from that, which is going to be, I think, something that, unfortunately, because I think that it shouldn't lead to, it becoming a normal reality, people still seem to think that there's bullshit behind it. Man, I would give anything for this to be bullshit. I would give anything for this to not be affecting me or not be occurring. However, it does. And so the biological side becomes very interesting, Evan. And when we talk about the biological side, I'm going to use this as a transition because biologically as well, it has been demonstrated and proven that exercise has some amazing results on a person who is struggling with operational stress injuries. So can you talk about what exercise did for you and helped you move along?
Yeah, it's interesting. As much as I obviously knew that exercise was important, obviously, seeing other people go through it and hear about it. When I first, before I went off, I actually gave up running for 3 months, and that's how I knew something was seriously wrong. I pretty much isolated myself, sheltered myself, gave up on everything. And then I decided when I did decide to finally ask for that help in January of 2021, I ended up taking on a new running coach because I was struggling to do it on my own, to get some accountability back into it. And, it was only for the first, I would probably say the first 3 months of therapy that I didn't really know why I decided to take up long distance running. And then it slowly started creeping in, and I went okay, I did it to run away from everything. I purposely chose to run 6 hours in the mountains on a weekend so I didn't have to think about anything. I don't listen to music. I don't, there's certain aspects of it where it's just like silence. I can be with my own thoughts. And the interesting thing is on those longer runs, people ask me, what do you think about? What do you do? I'm like, I don't think about anything. It's seriously the most calming thing for me. And I didn't quite realize why until I started to do some research on accelerated resolution therapy as I was in it and trying to understand it a little bit more just so I could process things and try to win at therapy. I mean, that was, that was what I was trying to do. I'm like, I'll do some research so I can be really good at this. Because I have that competitive nature to be good at something. And I realized the reason why I liked ART therapy so much is because the eye movement. So when you're running on a trail, your eyes are going left and right constantly. So it actually allows you to process things without talking about it. So even though I was running, I didn't realize this for probably, again, the first probably 4 or 5 months of the ART therapy. And then I was like, wait a minute, that's why I like it so much, because it's so similar to the ART therapy. I don't have to talk while I'm doing the running, but it mimics the eye movement and allows your left and right brain to be able to work in unison and try to, work better together. So, taking on that level of exercise, if I were to think about over the last 2 years, I've probably had over 150 accelerated resolution therapy sessions. We're talking twice a week consistently, sleep clinic, family physician, acupuncture, occupational therapy. I did everything that I could possibly do and surrendered to the process. I don't want to say I was the best, the best patient ever, but I committed to it. I didn't miss sessions. I didn't, even in my worst days when I didn't want to go, I went. But in comparison to that, I counted up the number of actual exercise hours that I've had over the last 2 years, and it was over 850 hours of actual exercise over that same period of time. So we're talking like 7 times the amount of actual like in-person therapy sessions that I actually had. So for me, like exercise became everything. Like I chose exercise from the outset over medication purely because of what I knew exercise could do. I mean, they've proven that for people that have depression, that exercise can be more beneficial than the medication. And, you know, I was willing to challenge that myself. And, you know, I have nothing against medication. I understand the needs for it. Sometimes it gets people to the point of being able to even talk. So, you know, I have nothing against it. But in my case, I knew what I needed for myself and was willing to sacrifice in order to do that. And that was doing everything I possibly could alongside the exercise.
So, and we're talking as well, and I mean, I think this is something that I don't know, I guess I'm interested in your take on it, is that exercise is one thing, and it's very important. However, there was a completely different level because you are also, as you said, using your right and left brain by your eyes moving back and forth when you're outside. So I'm not sure, Evan, if you're comfortable discussing what you think in terms of someone, you know, working out at home, staying in the same gym, not experiencing anything that causes their eyes to move or anything that gives their brain that opportunity to shut off, to process. I mean, do you have any thoughts in terms of how much exercising outside, running on trails, your sense of awareness actually being a calming thing as opposed to you not getting that sense if you're on a treadmill in a gym, for example?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you talk about like being in nature. I mean, there's several studies that have come out about, you know, how important it is for people who have PTSD to be out in nature. I mean, there's tons of people that are doing, you know, nature hikes and nature walks for PTSD as well. And it was so vital for me. I mean, there's a term called like grounding. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where it's like, you know, making sure that you're, you know, coming in contact with the ground as often as possible. And I mean, the other piece of this too is the sunlight. I mean, you know, the amount of research and studying that I've done over the last 2 years on just sleep alone, a few books that I came across that have been like instrumental, obviously, and then being followed by a athletic sleep behaviorist. Because as soon as I went to the sleep clinic and I told them that I'm an ultra runner and I run, you know, 80 to 100 kilometers a week, they're like, okay, we can't just deal with you here. We need to put you here because that's added stress to your system on top of all of the other stressors that you already have. So the light exposure is massive, especially first thing in the morning. There's been tons of people that have talked about it on podcasts. You know, Andrew Huberman is a big guy who talks about, you know, how vital it is to get, you know, direct sunlight into your eyes within the first 30 minutes of waking up. And there's just so many benefits to it that, you know, and, you know, running isn't for everybody. And that's the thing, right? Like it doesn't have to be running, you know, everybody sees, you know, perfect example is, you know, I get asked, okay, how do you run 324 kilometers, which is 200 miles? Like, how do you do that? Like, and then my first response is always like, you don't. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you run 1 kilometer at a time.
All right. I like that. Yeah.
You can't look, and it's no different than, you know, when I look at my post-traumatic situation and my growth outside of that, it's the exact same way that I've handled managing all of that. If I looked at everything that I've experienced and gone through and I put it all in one giant bucket and tried to deal with that, it's impossible. You can't.
It's overwhelming, right?
You can't do that. So I mean, okay, well, if I break it down into 1 kilometer intervals, my watch goes off, I check in with myself, I go, okay, like, you know, how are you feeling? Where are you feeling it? Like, do you feel pain? Do you whatever? And, you know, there's a lot of parallels for me with running and what I've experienced. And maybe that's something we can kind of touch on as well, just how parallel
Absolutely.
they are. And I'm sure there's people can find, you know, similarities, and whether it be, you know, working out, lifting weights, all these other things about, you know, doing hard things and finding somewhere to put it. I mean, I don't want to call it suffering. Sometimes when I choose to do these things, I don't think it's suffering, but it's, you know, the suffering that we choose helps us with the suffering that we don't choose, which is in my case the PTSD. And that's
Agree.
why the running has been so instrumental in that for me.
I agree with you, man. And I mean, my days of I enjoyed running. I mean, I certainly was not doing what you're doing. I am in a different situation now where running is no longer an option due to some major back problems. However, I do certainly understand what you mean in terms of, just that discomfort, almost like you're. Well, I kind of sometimes call it like punishing myself, but it wasn't punishing. There's sort of a sense of release that I would get from a sense of pain, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I guess what I'm trying to say, Evan, is I get that completely, not necessarily through exercise, but I mean, I'm pretty much coated, torso, everything in ink, and I didn't realize it for a long time, but that was a way that, to go back to your term, grounding, that always helped ground me again. Mm-hmm. It's like that little bit of pain. I don't know, man. I guess there's something wrong when you're getting tattooed and you fall asleep, but I would do that because it was just actually a release. There you go, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a release, brother. And, I love that you're getting that from exercising. Not that I would recommend when you're running 200 miles that you should fall asleep while you're running, but that you get that release from a sense of pain. Because I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know the psychology of it, but it's almost as if because we're feeling one kind of pain, that we're no longer recalling the other. So it's kind of like, I don't know, you have a sore throat, which really sucks until, you break your wrist. Then all of a sudden you don't think about your sore throat anymore. It's like it's not there, but it is there. It's however things got amplified to a different level. Your focus was removed from your throat. And so I guess, I would like you to talk about removing that focus and what that does when you take your mind off, the mental strain and the symptomology of post-traumatic stress and push yourself into a different direction, feeling a little bit of a different pain.
Yeah, it's obviously running those distances. There's things that come up and, things that I've experienced during that time in the running itself. I think, for me, there's within the running community, there's tons of people that have, gone through post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, addiction, alcoholism, drugs, all of these things. And sometimes people will swap one for the other. You're swapping the alcohol for the running, and now you're addicted to running, and it's, you're overtraining, you're getting injured, you're doing all these things. But, running may help with the symptoms, but it will never help with the why. And that's why, like, when people say running is therapy, I don't believe that at all. Running is complementary to therapy, but you can't do one without the other. It's one of these things. It's like you're always going to be missing a piece of the puzzle by only focusing on only exercise. I'm going to go and I'm going to work out 7 days a week and this is all going to be better. It might feel good, and you might be able to push that, we call it in the running world, like the pain cave. You might be able to put yourself in that pain cave and feel really good about it and like get really locked in, but you're still going to have all those other things beside you. It's like, you're still carrying the backpack with you. You haven't emptied anything out of the backpack. You're just like pushing through and going like, I'm going to just get this done. But with the running and the longer distances and, the pain that you have to, I don't want to say disassociate from, but the pain that you experience during that, it teaches you so much about not just the running aspect, but again, like bringing it back to like my life as well. I mean, I pull so much from these runs, and I can, reflect back and like really unpack it after these runs and really understand like, what is it like, when you get that pain and you're experiencing it. Let's say if I, perfect example is this last 200 mile, I ended up getting a massive blister on the bottom of my foot pad. I probably had it for about 45K, and I kept like acknowledging it and getting angry with it and getting frustrated with it, which is what sometimes we do when we're going through the shame and the guilt and all these other things. You get frustrated and angry with it. And I'm like, well, that's not helping me. I mean, it's like, it's like holding a piece of hot coal in your hand and just being like, well, that hurts. And you're just like still holding it and you're still holding it. You're like, well, that hurts, rather than just like putting it down and actually like sitting in it and going like, okay, like I'm angry right now. I can acknowledge that. I'm frustrated. I'm in pain. I can acknowledge the pain. I can like honor it. Because that's the other thing too, is like we see the pain and we try to like push it away and be like, no, it doesn't hurt. No, it doesn't hurt. And we just like keep distracting ourselves like all the time, whether it be with our phone, technology, like whatever it is. And you keep pushing away and pushing away and pushing away. But if you just like take a pause for a moment and just like be present with it and acknowledge it for what it is, like my foot hurts. Okay, that's a statement. But what's a better way to do that? Rather than, throwing statements at it, I'm going to start asking questions. Okay, if I popped it, would it make it feel better? If I kept running on it, is that going to make it worse? Like I start asking questions, because if I keep asking questions about it, then I can actually come up with some sort of resolution to it as well. And that's no different than this post-traumatic growth piece of asking those questions to yourself and going like, because statements are just, a statement is a statement. I say it to my kids all the time, like, tell me what you need, tell me what you want, and we can work from there. But if you're just going to say like, I can't have any more juice, well, you've just decidedly like made it so that you're not going to have any more juice. But if you said, could I please have some more juice? Like, yes, you can have some more juice. Like it's, it's interesting, those questions versus statements and that pain threshold.
That's very cool. And I think what I'm loving, Evan, as well, is that, you're sort of taking the analogy of a person who goes to the gym 7 days a week and really and truly working out at that point, or training at that point, or exercise at that point becomes a coping mechanism. It's a healthy coping mechanism. It's certainly a much better coping mechanism than alcohol use, for example. However, again, you're not going to deal with the beast inside of you until you face it. Coping is not necessarily going to bring it to you. It can give you relief. It can give you a sense of clarity. It can definitely make you healthier physically, which is going to impact you mentally. It will increase your self-esteem. But the reality is, like you said, you also had to be prepared to face the beast inside, to look at what's going on inside of you, and not push it down, not run away from it, but actually process it. So I love, Evan, that you said as well that after your runs, you will process everything. You will go through everything. You will look at it in terms of, well, everything that went on inside of you, be it physiological or mental. And you consistently, I think, are taking away from that something else that now gives you further growth, gives you a better way to handle things. I mean, am I wrong? Am I off base?
No, it's the biggest piece of it too is, when it comes to trauma, like it needs to feel a sense of safety before it can move. Like and like when you asked right off the top of the bat, when you said like, what's the one thing that allowed me to get through what I experienced? And it was finding that safe space, not just like somebody creating it for me, but finding that safe space within myself to be not okay, to be sad. I think we have like a sadness epidemic right now, where people are more lonely than they've ever been, more, isolated than they've ever been. And that, I mean, when you think about obviously post-traumatic stress growth and depression, anxiety, it's only fueling that. And to like sit there and again, like make space for the sadness and not push it away and not think that like you're wrong for being sad. Like, in fact, like you're probably right, because there's probably something to be sad about. Like it's okay to be sad. Like you're not broken. It means you're actually working really well. It's when you don't have the ability to be sad anymore that something is probably wrong. And that's a perfect example of my situation. Like I taught myself to not feel, because it was the only way to protect myself from all of the pain and the suffering that I was trying to help everybody else with over 2 decades. It was my way of protecting myself. But in turn, it shut my ability off to care for people in a way that, like, as a human, like, to be there for somebody, whether it be, you know, my own situation or my kids, you know, and that was a complete eye opener for me when I realized that I trained myself not to feel. I quite literally treated people like robots on the phone. They were not people to me, which is, like, saying it now is really hard to say, because my job was to help people. My job was to make sure that people's worst day didn't get any worse. That was my role. And I took it very seriously, but I also was like, I wasn't looking at my own self and what I needed. I was so focused on people pleasing and doing everything for everybody else that I didn't even stop to think about what I was putting myself through by literally, like, not feeling, which is, like, a little bit of an aside, but it just kind of popped in my mind. Like, that was a huge revelation for me in my post-traumatic growth, that I didn't know how to feel anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm walking right beside you, brother. Yeah. That's a reality. I think that, you know, we come to desensitize ourselves by, you know, depersonalize or dehumanizing, because we are doing everything we can to not feel some of those things we first felt on those first calls, those first incidents, our first experiences. And again, we just start training ourselves that this is the norm. And so what becomes a way to survive, and that's what we did. That's what it is. Post-traumatic stress is us building what we need inside to survive. But in order to do that, we shut down several things. And, you know, one of those things, like you just said, is sadness. We can say that, you know, something made us sad, but I mean, if you take a look back when you were in the thick of it, there are some horrific things that I attended that I really ought to have felt sad about, and nothing was there. And I think that becomes the reality, Evan, of the time it takes to process. You know, and that's something I would like you to hit on, just in terms of, again, we want to focus on the road ahead, what it is that you did to get yourself where you are now. Mm-hmm. But it takes a significant amount of time. I mean, how many people think that, you know, it's kind of like, well, how many sessions is it going to take for me to get better? You know, and after going through this a couple of years, I still, when I left work at the beginning of December, thought, well, you know, I can't imagine being off longer than a month. And I'll get myself straightened back out. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that as soon as we start coming to terms with some of these feelings again, we realize how many of them we shoved away, we pushed aside. How much more is actually there that needs to be processed, as opposed to some of the major events, I guess, that are sticking out to you. Mm-hmm. So, Evan, I mean, what are your thoughts with regards to that? And you know, again, with regards to the need to process and the amount of time that it takes, what is the investment that people need to make in order to get themselves on a path of post-traumatic growth?
Yeah, I think I'll use the parallel with running for me, because again, like that's really how I've grown, is looking at how I've been managing my running, and how in parallel, as my healing has gone, my running has become more focused as well too. And I've really, again, like, surrendering to the process and trusting the process. There's a book, I don't know if you've read it, Larry, but it's called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. I highly suggest it. It's funny, it came to me at a point where I was ready to receive it. Had I gotten that book 6 months earlier, I never would have touched it. It essentially is like a little bit of a guide on how to surrender and let yourself be vulnerable, let yourself be okay being sad, and knowing that, you know, in order to move through it, like, you have to experience it. You can't push those things away. You know, it's more about, you know, not what we're going to get out of it, but how much we're willing to put into it. You know, how badly do you want to pull yourself out of this hole? and that's where I say like exercise versus medication versus all these things. Like, it doesn't matter what you choose. It really doesn't. It has everything to do with what you're willing to put into it. And that's no different than my running. Can I go run 200 miles without doing all of the 6 months of training before it? Sure, I could probably go and try. Is it going to completely blow up and am I going to finish? Probably not. So for me, it's really surrendering to the process. Like that is the number one thing that I can say for anybody who's experiencing this, that especially that, like, I mean, your podcast is a perfect example. Like, you're not alone. Like, we get in these pockets of isolation when we go off of work and we're at home by ourselves. And let's say, we might get one or two people who reach out to us. Great. But, a perfect example is, somebody who, let's say, gets a broken arm and, they can't help and they're trying to do everything they can. Well, what shows up? People start dropping off meals and start dropping off, help and food. I'll come babysit your kids. I'll drive you to your appointment. That doesn't happen with mental health at all. It's completely like you're basically a man on an island and you think you are quite literally by yourself. So for me, it's like, connecting with people that are important in your life and making sure, there's something I came across, and this is probably one of the best tools that I could possibly pass on. It's quite simply called check on me. So, I mean, you and I, we may be going through something. We may be experiencing something that is just like internally a battle that day. We can't expect people around us to instinctually know what we're going through. Like, people can't read our minds. So if we're not willing to put ourselves out there and be vulnerable and say, perfect example is I'll go to my fiance and I'll say, can you check on me? And she'll go, we have a rule, like, stop whatever you're doing. And she'll say, hey, Evan, like, what are you feeling right now? Because I'm acknowledging that I have something going on and I really need the connection right now. And I'll say, I'm feeling really sad. Like, I had a bad session today, went through something, and I'm not sure what to do with it. And she'll check in. She'll be like, is there anything I can do for you? And I would say, you know what? I just like really want a hug right now. And I just want to go sit on the couch for half an hour and watch a show with you. But it's making sure that people realize that, like, we think that we're a burden in these moments. We think that we are like taking away somebody's like joyful day by like dumping our stuff on them. But that simple little tool in our relationship has changed everything. I even have my kids doing it. My kids will come up to me and say, Daddy, can you check on me? And I'll say, hey, rather than saying, how are you feeling? Because what's the instant answer that most people are going to give? I'm good. I'm okay. I'm good. But if you say, what are you feeling? The how versus the what is very different, because it makes you focus on that like actual emotion and like what you're feeling in your body at that time. So, to have my kids doing that now with me, like, it just shows me again, like that post-traumatic growth of me learning to not feel and now learning to feel again, and having my kids now having a tool for themselves at the younger ages that they are, that they can actually know that like people care about you and love you. And as long as you're willing to put yourself out there that you're not having a good day, it allows you to have that like moment of connection. So like, check on me. It's that simple. Like, it's such a simple tool.
That's a beautiful thing. Like, that is an absolutely beautiful thing when you say as well, what are you feeling as opposed to how are you feeling? Because it changes the reply. To me, there's a bunch of takeaways just in terms of that statement, just in terms of what are you feeling. Your check on me status, I think, has done a fantastic thing in terms of relationships, because we talk about the stress that it puts on the relationship. And I agree, Evan, we feel that we are nothing but a huge burden on our loved ones. We oddly think that people should be able to know what we're feeling based on our facial expressions, based on the way we entered a room. And then we become annoyed when they don't get it, which only causes more fissures in the relationship. and we're not involving our loved one enough, as opposed to thinking that you're just constantly dumping on them. It's not about what led you to here again. It's not about tell me about your day per se. It's about what are you feeling. I think there's a huge takeaway, not in terms of just, a married life or your partner, whatever. There's also something to take away there with regards to raising our children, because I know as a person who, feeling periods of sadness as an adult, later on learning that it was depression, I constantly tried to protect my kids from that. So that if they expressed that they were feeling sad, I would do whatever I could to try and get them out of that mood. And it's like you're trying to eliminate what is natural and a feeling that they should be taught that it's okay and it's normal and you will experience this. Instead, I'm like, what do we need to do to fix this? What do we have to do? However, again, to go back and go, yeah, I would have loved to have had the opportunity to have just said or to have just asked, what are you feeling? And to not make being sad such a horrible thing. It's okay. The only reason we appreciate sun is because of rain. The only reason we appreciate happiness is because we have sadness. We are configured in such a way that comparison is typically how we understand and comprehend. I think it's phenomenal, Evan. I mean, there's a lot of takeaways from this episode when we do talk about exercise being a huge thing, but not necessarily just being exercise. Don't punish yourself to the sense that you're working out 7 days a week and you're not processing anything. You still have to get out. You still have to go to your sessions. You still have to process it. You will only get out of this what you are willing to put into it. So if you are going to half-ass sessions, and I'll say half-ass in the sense that you are just not being completely vulnerable, you are not laying it on the table, you have to understand that you are not going to fully heal. You are not going to get back as much as you want because you didn't give what it is that you needed to give. The fact that you get out and you're getting sunlight, you're getting fresh air, you're just getting outside and letting that sun hit your eyes, you are on a trail, you're experiencing new things, are all healthy because it gets your brain moving and active again. And that when we're at home, we actually appreciate our feelings, we actually become aware of our feelings, and instead of thinking that others need to know that, we ask them to ask us what we're feeling. Mm-hmm. Brother, there's a lot of tools you just shared.
Yeah, it's, and just to touch on the piece about the sadness, when you're talking about, your kids when they were younger, and that was one of my greatest realizations was I was passing on, again, the phrase of if you knew better, you would do better. I didn't know any better. I thought I was, hardening them up and teaching them that, that life was going to be hard and all these other things. And you shouldn't feel that. To know that I was having that effect on my kids, broke me. And now obviously I'm super happy that I have the tools that I have in order to give them something that they can take for themselves. I mean, the one question that I've asked myself, I don't know, numerous times was, how much have I distanced myself from the beating of my own heart? It's even hard to talk about.
Take your time, brother. Take your time.
You completely lose yourself in these jobs. You're somebody else's hero most days. I can't even think about the number of people that I've helped over the years, and being of service is probably one of the most unselfish things you can possibly do for somebody. But to know that I was completely distanced myself from my own internal compass, it's hard to even it's hard to look back and know that things could have been different had at age 18 coming into this industry 20 years ago, you don't talk about these things. The job was take the call. If you have to go for a walk, go for a walk. And the question was always like, after a bad call, are you good? And the answer would always be, yep. And you take the next call. We weren't given tools at the beginning of this. And I mean, for me, at age 18, when you think about the human brain, like, it's not fully developed until age 26. So I was quite literally dealing with the sickest of the sick people for the better part of 8 years, and like learning how not to feel while my brain was still developing. So, you know, to come back to that, you know, how much have I distanced myself from the beating of my own heart? Like, that is like my catalyst now. Like, every time I'm doing something, it's like, am I actually like honoring myself in what I'm choosing to do or what direction I want to go? Not, you know, what can you do for other people? Like, I want to be of service, but not at my own expense. And I think that's, you know, 20 years in a career when I'm only 38 is like, I stop and think sometimes, I'm like, I have a whole decade, like career left in what I choose to do. You know, knowing that I'm not going back to my previous role is obviously, there's some comfort in it, but there's also some like scary thoughts that come in that go like, I defined myself by that job for the better part of 2 decades. So like, where do you go from there? And that's, you know, that's a big question in my mind still right now as of today. And I'm trying to, you know, just not push things too hard and like trying to come up with an answer. Things will show up as they need to, as I, you know, move through the post-traumatic growth, and, you know, just again, like realigning myself every single time. Like, am I actually like choosing with my heart, or am I choosing with the pre-programmed notion of my post-traumatic stress?
I love it. Yeah. That's an amazing takeaway as well, Evan. And I mean, I think that, you know, when we look back on what was shared during this episode, so many things to take away, but there becomes as well, I think you summed it up when you say that, you know, when we're in service, it's funny because we become accustomed to always serving other people and really not having the ability to serve ourselves. And that not having an ability becomes not wanting to. And it just continually snowballs because you have failed to deal with 2 decades of your emotions, 2 decades of your experiences. And I mean, it's going to leave some scars. So, for everyone out there who's listening, you have spent your career serving others. Please take a moment to step back and to serve yourself. Go to your sessions. Get out of your house. Talk to people again. Start reaching out and asking what others are feeling. Others will reciprocate to you. You will once again redevelop those social relationships. You will have an opportunity to process everything that's occurred. And if you put in enough work and enough dedication to yourself, you're going to get to a point, as Evan has, and as I believe I have, that there becomes some light at the end of the tunnel and a sense of growth. That ever impending sense of doom starts to fade. And you actually start to see some positives again. But you have to put in that work. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6. Please help me.
Don't go away. There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing, hey, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
And for those of you who stuck around for the extra bit, like at the end of the Marvel movies, Evan has something else that needs to be shared. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, thanks, sir. I just wanted to pass on, when I talked about, how I run 200 miles by breaking it down by kilometer. One of my practitioners, when I was like in the shit, put it like so eloquently. He was talking about how, we have to manage our mental health in seasons. Think about mental health in 3-month intervals. Like fall's here now, like the leaves are dropping, leaves are changing color, the wind is getting cold, and we're going to get that first like crunchy frosty grass underneath of our feet, and then after that you move into like a season of wintering, because we can't always remain in constant spring, always blooming, always producing, always distracted. It's not possible. So it's not a matter of what happened last year, it's not a matter of what happened this year, it's a matter of being present, risking being seen, and really, understanding, being present, taking everything slowly, and just understanding and recognizing that, as the seasons change, so can you. And really, really thinking about this in smaller pieces and understanding that we are all capable of healing as long as we're willing to put in that effort and time for ourselves.